Hello, everybody. I am Markos Moulitsas. I am here with Kerry Eleveld. Thank you for joining us in this week's edition of The Brief, our weekly show about politics. Today, we're going to have two great guests. We're going to have Elie Mystal. He is a justice writer at The Nation, and we're going to be talking all things Supreme Court. We know how important it is right now, and we know how important it's going to be next year. And we're also going to have Daily Kost's own Carolyn Fiddler. She is an expert in state legislatures, and guess what? Republican state legislatures are trying to steal and cheat this election. So we're going to talk about how much we should worry about that and if there's anything we can do to combat this effort. But before we bring anybody on, Kerry, 3 weeks.
I would just like to say that I'm shocked to hear that Republicans are trying to steal the election rather than actually win it with votes. I mean, it's just stunning. Who would have ever guessed it?
I mean, you either change to appeal to a changing American electorate.
Right. You either have popular policies or you just steal. That's so. Yeah.
So remember, nobody wants to remember, but remember 4 years ago when Donald Trump won that election. I couldn't fathom 4 years, like surviving 4 years, yet here we are. And it hasn't been easy, right?
Oh my God. I mean, what is really amazing is how much destruction he has done in 4 years. And I, like many progressives, feared his presidency, thought it was going to be horrific. It was going to be terrible. And it has just so far exceeded anything that I was capable of imagining in terms of how bad it's been and how much damage he's done to our institutions and our democracies, not to mention our, norms, et cetera. So anyway, but
yeah, I guess I expect the one thing I expected and it didn't happen. I expected him to be better at BSing his way to being a president, at least pretending to be president, but he never did, right? It was always that candidate, Twitter, Trump, and he never changed. So we're going to bring our first guest up. Go ahead.
What's interesting, okay, so real quick, what's interesting about that now, I think, is at least in the last election, you had a 3-week period, a several weeks period before the election where he had enough people around him working on the campaign that were still at that point not total sycophants and were willing to, they actually thought they were trying to do something kind of politically normal and win a normal campaign, right? And they advised him to keep a low profile. And as he kept a lower profile in those final weeks, he actually started to do better. And then, of course, we got the Comey letter. I mean, the FBI director, James Comey, reopened the investigation into Clinton. And, a lot of late breakers went for Trump. And part of that is that he was kind of on ice a little bit for the last few weeks after the Access Hollywood tape came out. And
they shut him up. They shut him up.
They managed to shut him up. Well, he doesn't have any, what Trump is really good at is surrounding himself with the lowest level people who are willing to tell him anything he wants to hear. And that's exactly what he's got now. And so, he thinks that the answer to his plummeting polling is to get back on the campaign trail at any cost. And, more power to him. Like, I think it's a complete disaster for, him like tweeting today, Sessions, like California is going to HE double toothpicks, vote Trump. I mean, like, what? Take his phone away from him? I mean, he's just like, anyway. So I think this is actually good. But go ahead. Please.
It is good. With that though, let's talk Supreme Court. We have I'm so thrilled to have Elie Mystal of The Nation. He's a justice writer. He's going to be joining us. And Elie, this could not be a better week to talk to you, could it?
This is my week. This is what I was designed for. But Markos, before we start, I want to thank you because you're one of the reasons I'm here. I was a law student. I was at a law firm in the early 2000s, and I was reading the Daily Kos, and I was seeing what you were doing, and I was like, this is the work that I should be doing. And so I partially blame you for one of the reasons why I make less now than I did when I was 27 years old.
Oh my God, one of you makes it all worth it. That's it. I'm done. I can retire happy now.
I think we have a new standard for people who come on as guests, right? They have to give some glowing, reference and memory about how they got into this because Moulitsas, got them going on it, right? I mean, that's a high bar.
I don't know.
Your site was very important to me as I was transitioning from being a practicing corporate attorney to doing what I do now. So I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so very much.
Kerry. Yeah, we're super happy to have you here. Thanks for joining us. And, I was going through your article in The Nation. Today marks the start of a truly terrifying Supreme Court term, right? And it didn't make me feel good is the first thing I would like to say. But I'm not holding that against you. I'm just letting you know it wasn't like a warm, fuzzy situation. But,
Yeah, this term was bad when RBGB was alive.
Yeah,
right.
And that's what's crazy about it, right? It didn't feel good then, and it feels worse now. So anyway, but in that piece, you gave sort of a big picture perspective of the challenges posed by the current makeup of the court and what could be. Now the current makeup of the court could get even worse. But it also gets into the minutia of the cases that are going to be argued before that court. And in light of those two perspectives, sort of that higher level perspective and the minutia of the cases, the court makeup and the cases that are going to be before them, as you've been watching these confirmation hearings for Amy Coney Barrett, what has stuck out to you? I mean, it's a huge question, but you can feel free to just hone in on something that you find very interesting, or you can go bigger.
She is the most anti-choice judge to have been nominated to the Supreme Court since Roe v. Wade was decided. And I feel like because it's being couched in legalese, because in part Democrats are so defeated and they don't feel like there's anything that they can do, because Republicans have gotten so good at doing this legal sleight of hand, people are kind of missing it. There has been no judge ever nominated for the Supreme Court who is this on the record as being anti-choice and specifically anti-Roe v. Wade. And even in these hearings today, when she's been pressed on it, she has taken, I would dare say, strident positions against Roe that other Republicans before her, and be they, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, or even John Roberts and Thomas Alito, have simply not taken. She directly has been saying today that this whole, if you've heard this whole conversation about super precedent, right? First of all, that's a jackwagon made-up term. That's not a real thing. But the issue is that there are certain cases that everybody kind of says, like, look, even if we disagreed with it, we're not going to go back and overturn it, right? That's the right. Kind of setup of
for instance, Brown versus the Board of Education, right? This is one of the things she's holding up as a quote unquote super precedent is no one's trying to go back and overturn that landmark civil rights court ruling on Brown versus Board of Education, right? That's what she's talking about. Okay, so go ahead,
exactly.
Please.
So first of all, that's a lie, right? I mean, if you'd ask, I don't know, Jeff Sessions, the former Attorney General, he would very much like to overturn Brown. Like Brown is still a live issue in so many different ways. But as you say, she wants to hold up Brown as this case that you would never go back and overturn, but she won't give Roe the same kind of precedential value. And she says directly that the reason why she won't do it is because it's still a live issue. The fact that people still fight about it proves that that's why it's not one of these super precedents, as if people don't still fight about Brown and still fight about the Voting Rights Act. And oh yeah, as if the Supreme Court didn't literally overturn Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act 2 seconds ago in Shelby County v. Holder. So her splitting off of some of these civil rights decisions from Roe v. Wade is a terrible sign for Roe v. Wade that literally other Republican nominated judges have simply not been willing to go there. Right. So it's when you ask me, like, the thing that stands out is how anti-Roe she is, and how everybody's just kind of like, well, I mean, Republicans don't like Roe. Like we're all just kind of like, prepared to take it and prepared to accept this. And I don't know how to make that case more real for people. They're going after abortion rights very directly, and she's not even embarrassed by it.
Right. And so when I was, as a layperson, right, because I don't have a law degree, when I was listening to some of these hearings this morning, she started talking about the super precedent versus the precedent, the super precedent versus the precedent. It sounded like really what she was saying is some precedents matter and some precedents don't. And I just get to pick and choose which ones matter and which ones don't. I mean, that
what she's saying is that some precedents she likes and some precedents she doesn't.
Exactly.
And you know what, Kerry? She's actually written this. Again, this is not her like flubbing the hearing question, right? She actually is on the record. She has written about her view of precedent, and she has written that if a judge feels that the precedent that they're being asked to uphold is against their own view of what the Constitution requires, the judge should feel free in overturning that precedent. Again, that is extremist and radical. That is a standard that even other conservative judges have not taken. Right, that this idea that just I don't like how they decided the Constitution, so I can overturn. That's not precedent. That's I woke up today and had some cornflakes for breakfast and decided to kill women's rights. Like that. That's what she's talking about.
So there's this operating theory, right, that Republicans really don't want to overturn abortion rights. It's such a great issue to use to gin up their base. But they always seem to fail by one vote every time they try to do anything substantial. Obviously, they chipped away, right? But anything substantial. Now you're looking at a 6-3 majority. You're looking at this sort of extreme interpretation of what president should look like. Do you think that there are any Republicans that might start having second thoughts about this nomination? Or are they also completely have surrendered to the quote inevitable, can't even talk today, to the inevitable of her nomination being confirmed?
I mean, look, the pro-choice Republican no longer exists, right? We used to have like the Lincoln Chaffees of the world and whatever. And now it's like basically Susan Collins on a good day, if she feels like it. That's it for your pro-choice Republicans. I wrote another piece that I've written in The Nation, really tries to explain exactly how they're going to come for Roe. Right. And so one of the things that Republicans are basically trying to do is to overturn Roe and make Democrats not jump out of their seats because they'll say like, oh, it'll just be up to the states. Every state will decide whether or not they're allowed to have an abortion. And because Democrats tend to be, we're not evenly spread around the country, as the Electoral College constantly reminds us of, right? And so we tend to think, limousine liberals living in New York, living in California, living in Massachusetts, we kind of think like, well, it would be terrible if Montana took away abortion rights, but also screw Montana. I'm going to be safe with my rights here on the coast or in my blue state. That's not true, because the second part of overturning Roe is to then clear the legal pathway through for this argument that's called fetal personhood, right? So while with one hand, the Republicans want to take away a woman's right to choose, with the other hand, they want to raise up a fetus in the womb, still attached to a woman, to the same legal to the legal standing of personhood. They are literally willing to argue that a fetus has more rights than the woman who is carrying the fetus. And that is how they're going to take away abortion rights, even in the blue states, right? Because let's say they overturn Roe, New York passes a law, hey, you can get an abortion here up to fetal viability 26 weeks, just like the Roe standard. Well, then New York will be sued on a fetal personhood argument, and they don't have and that's what's going to be 5-4, right? Roberts is not a fetal personhood guy. But Thomas is, Alito is, Kavanaugh is, and now if they get Barrett, that's the fifth vote for the fetal personhood law that will be coming up to take away your abortion rights in the blue states after they take away Roe. Now, they're thinking they can get away with this for a couple of reasons. One, what I just explained is complicated for some people to understand, and the Democrats themselves do not do a good job of explaining that. And two, what I am talking about happens over the course of a decade. And so frog in boiling water, right. It's a decade-long fight that the Republicans are willing to wage. The Democrats, because it's not hitting them right in the face, aren't necessarily prepared for what's coming next.
Right. And just to bring this home for people too, when you get into something like a late term abortion, which everybody says, oh, that seems awful. Well, it is awful because those folks wanted to have a baby, right? They as I saw, Pete Buttigieg just like ruined a complete set on Fox News by reminding them that people who go through late term abortions don't do it because they wanted to. They do it because
oops, I didn't notice this thing for 6 months.
I didn't notice I was pregnant. I better do something. I mean, that's not what happened. These people, they've picked out a name. They've probably painted their room. They have a crib. They wanted a baby, and some sort of tragic medical situation comes up that forces them to do something, forces them to make a choice that is a horrific choice. And it's tragic. None of them want to do that.
And it's also worth pointing out that these late-term abortions only account for something like 1% or 2% of all abortions that take place in this country.
Right.
So you're talking about
chopping block just the same.
A very minority issue, but because it sounds so horrific to people who have never been in that situation, it's something that Republicans can use to gin up fear, and scare people and make people vote for Republican candidates. It's a game that they've been playing again for years. Again, and that's the other thing about like this hearing and what's happening now at the Supreme Court. As Democrats kind of come to the realization, not that we're losing, but that we've lost. The reason why we've lost is because Republicans have been ready for this fight for 40 years. They've been waging this war for 40 years, and the Democrats don't wage it. The Democrats don't fight it. It's only really been in the last 4 years. It was really only with Merrick Garland that we even started to get Democrats being like, hey, this Supreme Court thing seems important.
Right.
Like that's new for the Democratic Party to really hone in and focus on the courts. For the most of the past 40 years since Reagan, since Bork, really, the Republicans have been singularly focused on this issue, and all of that work and effort and training and money. I think Sheldon Whitehouse today did a great job of talking about the money.
If you weren't listening today, Google Sheldon Whitehouse, and he talked about the whole ecosystem of donors and organizations that have been formed around this effort to overturn Roe v. Wade, and how much money has flowed to that, and how really the legal advocates, the organizations, all of them are funded by the same people, small group of dark money donors. So
I like to tell this story, Kerry, that, I already started this show talking about how I used to be a lawyer. If I went to Harvard Law School, if I had any conservative anything about me, if I was conservative curious at any point while I was at Harvard Law School, Leonard Leo would have found me. Not one of his minions, like Leonard Leo himself would have come to my campus, sat down and talked and brought me out to lunch, encouraged me to get off the plantation and be a conservative. He would have given me the whole spiel. If I then agreed to, if I sold my soul for that, Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society would have figured out where I was supposed to work after law school, who I was supposed to clerk for, how I was supposed to get on the Supreme Court, so that they would have primed me. Right. So that if, God forbid, Clarence Thomas ever died and they really had to go with another black person, I would be one of those people on the list, right?
Right.
That's why I say when we're talking about the generational fight here, the Republicans have been grooming people like Amy Coney Barrett since law school to do this work.
So speaking of systemic problems, let me get in real quick about, you talk about these court cases that are coming up in this term, right? And what you say is that many of them were not only written, the legal challenges are being written, are coming against opinions that were made by McConnell judges, oftentimes on McConnell majorities, where the judge confirmed by McConnell actually flipped the circuit court or whatever to a conservative majority, and then it's written by one of these McConnell judges. So this thing is just so systemic at this point. I mean, it's coming from all directions. And, we talk about expanding the court, which I'm totally supportive of personally, because I just think, the institution itself is going to become so delegitimized. But in any case, what is expanding the court enough, the Supreme Court, if you have this whole system below the Supreme Court of, feeder cases and feeder judges that are, where these really conservative, rulings are sort of getting filtered up to the top?
Well, you don't just expand the Supreme Court. Look, I have a whole thing about court expansion that really goes more to the reform aspect of it than the vengeance aspect of it.
Sure.
And look, I'm happy for vengeance. Like, we deserve some vengeance, and I'm fine with that. But if you expanded the Supreme Court by 10 or 20 justices, if you expanded we are overdue for a lower court expansion. We used to expand the lower courts about once every 20 years or so. We'd either add more justices or add entirely new circuits as our population expanded. We haven't expanded the lower courts since Carter. We are long overdue to put more justices on the Ninth Circuit or more justices on the Seventh Circuit, or things of that nature. So we're overdue for an expansion. And what does expansion do? Well, it does, whether it's the Supreme Court or lower court, it does two things. One, it makes, especially for the Supreme Court, the random wheel of death, the death of any one justice, less important. It should not be an existential crisis for the party out of power when a Supreme Court justice dies. It is, because of how limited those spots are. But we shouldn't have to go to the mattresses every time NRBG or Scalia passes away. It should be something that happens kind of in the normal course of, people getting old. So expanding the court makes each individual justice less important. That does a lot to depoliticize and de-emphasize how important these nomination fights are. But the second thing it does, and this goes more to your point, Kerry, if you have more people writing a majority to encourage half of your colleagues to come along with it, fundamentally mainstreams your decision, right? If I've only got to convince 4 of my liberal friends to agree with me, I'm going to have one kind of decision, right? If I got to convince 10 of my liberal friends, or dare I say 20 of my liberal friends to come along with me, well, we're going to have a much more moderate, position. As I've written, like, this is how people end up at Chili's, right? This is how people end up eating at Olive Garden. Like, nobody likes Olive Garden, but it's like, all right, look, we just all go. We just all, right? It's a compromise candidate. And when you have more people, what you get is compromised, mainstream, narrow decisions, and that changes the kind of legal fight up and down the court system.
You get the Olive Garden of court decisions. And I swear we're not sponsored by Olive Garden, just to be clear.
That sounds horrifying to me. So, Elie, do you get a sense in your reporting?
I want abortions and breadsticks. Like, is that so much to ask in this country?
Not at all. Not at all. So when you're talking to Democrats, you're doing your reporting, you're talking to interested parties, do you see any real energy or desire from Democrats to actually expand the courts next year? Because, as you said, there's this defeatism about the current battle before the Senate. And who knows, maybe COVID will come to the rescue. We'll do a Deus Ex Machina at the last minute, right? Or so that could still happen. It's been that kind of year. But assuming she does get confirmed, this is a dramatically illegitimate court. You're right. It shouldn't be all about vengeance. And you made an excellent case for why we should do this for practical reasons. But do you get any sense at all that Democrats would be interested in waging that battle?
More so now. I mean, look, Joe Biden was like my 8th choice, I think, in the primary.
How many candidates were there? The last one.
He was the one that was most against court expansion, right? Pete Buttigieg had a whole court expansion plan. I didn't agree with it, but it was a whole plan, right? And a lot of the other candidates, primary candidates, were at least court expansion curious, right? Joe Biden was the one who was just like, nope, 9 is an important number, like baseball. Like that was Biden, and I was like, ah. But so the fact that we're even at the point where Biden's like, I'm not going to tell you, like that is like, he has moved, my friends, even in these past 2 weeks, from absolutely not to maybe, right? Yeah. Other Democrats, other senatorial people and congressional people are starting to think creatively about it. Ro Khanna put forward this bill for term limits. Now, that bill is unconstitutional according to the current Supreme Court. If you want term limits, what you need to do is bring 10 justices to overrule the 9 justices that are currently on the court who don't like term limits, and that's how you get term limits. right? So as people like Ro Khanna realize that term limits are going to be ruled unconstitutional by this 6-3 conservative court, as you know, like all of these things kind of confluencing and happening is making the Democrats at least interested in what I have been saying for people like me have been saying for a long time, and we would run into brick walls. So I do see a movement. I do think that the Republicans, just the bald-faced, just illegitimate way that they're going about this process is inspiring people to action. But at the bottom line, this is a base thing. Like if the Democratic base demands this, it will happen.
Right.
And if the Democratic base does it, then it won't.
That comes down to pushing. If, you know, like universe willing, Joe Biden wins and takes the White House, that comes down to a grassroots push at the base level to, you know, push the Democrats to be as good as we need them to be because things have gotten so out of whack. But I do think, to your point, you know, about all of a sudden Democrats waking up and saying, wait, you mean this is going to affect my issue? Well, one of Biden's big issues is the Affordable Care Act because it's a legacy issue for him. So, I mean, there's a piece of me that's like, there's something deeply personal about the idea that this court very well could overturn the ACA. I mean, that it seems like it would be motivating, not just on the, you know, partly on a public service level for Joe Biden, but also on a personal legacy. You know, he worked to secure those votes.
The difficult thing that we have is that when new politicians get into office, their first thought is passing legislation. Again, this is one of the reasons why Democrats have failed on this issue. When Republicans get into office, their first thought is pack the court. Let's get some justices. Let's get some judges on, right? When Democrats get in, oh, we should pass laws because laws are good. And again, they're not playing the long game. They don't realize that the law that you pass today is going to be overruled by the court in 5 or 10 years. Look at what's happening with Obamacare, right? That was passed in the Congress, 60 senators, signed by the president. It's been under judicial threat for its entire existence because of the Republican control of the courts. And so making that one connection. So you've got Democrats being like, oh, we should add DC and Puerto Rico as states. You know who's going to nullify that? The Supreme Court. But they're not going to do it for a couple, right? We should pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Well, you know who's going to nullify that? The Supreme Court. Just like they're nullifying the current Voting Rights Act. Voting rights is the hook that I'm hoping the grassroots can push. If the Democrats manage to win and then don't use every shred of their power to defend the voting rights of the, dare I say, people of color who put them in office, that will be a complete failure. Using all of your power to defend voting rights in this country at this point now also includes packing the court with justices who care about voting rights.
So, Elie, I know you've given us more time than we were actually promised, so I'm incredibly grateful for that. I am really looking forward to having you as an ally next year as we work to build this grassroots movement to expand the courts, because as you very eloquently said, and you also, Kerry, the entire liberal agenda, the entire Biden agenda is going to get nullified by this court. And it is not a court that is representative of the American people. It's a court that has been fueled by Russia's influence. It is a deeply illegitimate court. And I think we need to fix that if we can even begin to talk about fixing American democracy. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back and talk about this some more, because this is really something that I hope that we can really focus on next year. It's critically important. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, Kerry,
I'm jazzed. I'm jazzed. Let's expand all the courts.
Oh my God, totally. So we were going to discuss this a little bit more, but I think that went longer than I expected. Thank God, because it was freaking amazing.
It was fantastic.
But we're going to bring in Daily Kos's Carolyn Fiddler. She is communications director, but just as importantly, she is amongst the nation's top experts on state legislatures, and she obsessively tracks them. I don't know how she does it.
I don't know how she does it either. More power to her. Jeez, I don't know.
She's overrated.
Particularly since, what is that in the background? Is that a? So you track all the legislatures while you have a stash of wine, booze.
It's easier to track with a little bit of bourbon in hand.
Politics is always better with just a little bit of alcohol on tap. So there you go.
So the reason we wanted to talk to you is that we by all indications, the election's going very well, right? Biden has about a 9 to 10 point lead in nationally in the key battleground states in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. He has over a 6% lead in all of those 3 states. And if we win those 3 states, it's over, right? You know, you look at Texas and North Carolina and Florida and Georgia, there's all these great other battlegrounds, Arizona, but really the ones that will decide this election are Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And we look really good in those. The Senate battlegrounds look really well. Looks like we're poised to take at least a small majority in the U.S. Senate. So in a normal year, you're like, oh yeah, this is great. Like, woo, like let's just ride these 3 weeks out and coast to victory. Thing is, we know that Republicans are doing everything they can in the places that they can to cheat, right? We're seeing efforts to subvert democracy, whether by suppressing the vote or by outright potentially cheating. And so my question to you is, as we really work hard to close out this election and do everything we can to win, how much should we worry about those Republican efforts?
Quite a lot, I think. The things that Republicans are considering doing, I certainly have not ruled out in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, involves subverting the will of the people of those states by declaring a failed election and substituting Trump electors for the duly appointed Biden electors.
How could they do that? How is that even possible?
It shouldn't be possible. It's blatantly unconstitutional, super illegal, will hopefully be thrown out by every court it might come before.
Oh, but we just had that conversation.
Right.
And that's another thing. Republicans have been so good, not just about like Federalist Society things and all that, but they've been funding so the courts where judges are elected, they've been supporting those efforts for Republicans, like for their own side for years, and Democrats just don't have that kind of effort, which is a problem. But
so this elector issue, can you walk through the mechanics of that? Because it's so esoteric and it just doesn't even process. It's so crazy.
Yeah. Well, I did not come up with this. A very, very smart law professor wrote a law review article last year that explored this possibility. And if you've been watching state politics as long as I have, you realize that Republicans in these state legislatures will do anything to hold on to power. They don't care. They have been just doing whatever they want for the last decade, ever since they came to majorities in so many legislatures across the country. So first is to expect Republicans to do the right thing or the constitutional thing is just to have not been paying attention all this time. So the fear is that in states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin especially, where absentee votes, mail-in votes don't even start getting counted until Election Day, there's going to be something called the red mirage. More Democrats are requesting mail-in ballots in these states than Republicans. Republicans are poised to vote more in person than Democrats are. Those votes will get counted more quickly because when you have a mail-in ballot and you can't start counting it or processing it until Election Day, you have to open that envelope, take it out, unfold it, and then feed it through whatever scanner or however your counting method is. It just takes more time. So you have Trump appearing to lead in in-person votes a couple hours after the polls close. And then more and more of these mail-in ballots get counted. And then Joe Biden, starts leading because these mail-in ballots are Democratic. Okay, great. Joe Biden is leading. He gets the electors from that state, except for, say, you've been paying attention to what Trump has been saying for the past several months, which is that mail-in ballots are fraudulent, and Democrats are trying to perpetrate fraud. So Republicans in, say, Pennsylvania, taking cues from this, to say, okay, all these ballots counted after like midnight on November 3rd are clearly fraudulent. We are declaring a failed election and we're substituting Trump electors.
Why can they do that?
Wait, sorry. Just to be clear, they're going to declare what was the word for it? A failed
election. Yeah. So according to the Constitution, state legislatures have the capacity to appoint electors, except for every state has taken that power away from the legislature and given it to the winner of the popular vote. Except for Maine and Nebraska, who allocate it by congressional district. It's very strange. But regardless, Republicans have to take that power back, very, very much in violation of due process. Like, it's just super unconstitutional. But the point is to sow chaos until January 21st. So,
what states can they do this in?
Well, Pennsylvania is a prime candidate because they're still in session after the election. They can come in as a legislature controlled by Republicans and do this potentially. Wisconsin is also a threat because, again, a state where we've seen Republicans do whatever they want for the last decade. They can call themselves into extraordinary session with their majorities that they have.
And the Democratic governor in both those states have zero power to influence this at all.
Correct. They will, stand by the rule of law. They will want to do the constitutional and correct thing and give the electors to the winner of the state's popular vote. They will send, there's a certificate of ascertainment that gets sent to the federal government. One copy goes to the president of the Senate, who just happens to be on the ballot this year. And, all hell breaks loose. It goes to court. Chaos ensues.
You also...
Go ahead, Kerry.
You also said you were mildly worried about this in Michigan. What makes Michigan a slightly, because that's another state where you have the bifurcation of power, the governor and then the Republican legislature, Democratic governor. So what makes Michigan slightly less worrisome to you personally?
Two things. One thing is that Republicans did pass legislation allowing ballots to start being processed slightly before Election Day. So that's something. And also they have a stronger governor than state Wisconsin does. Their Democratic governor has definitely, has not hesitated to throw elbows in a way that Wisconsin just has not.
Whitmer has been sort of a rock. I mean, I'm from Michigan originally, so I've sort of been enjoying her, watching her just like stand her ground. I mean, anyway, but.
So we're in this sort of situation where, you have to win, like if you're a Democrat, you have to win by 10 points to avoid not losing the election. I mean, this is absolutely patently absurd. Are these shenanigans at the state level? Is there anything Democrats can do if they take control of the federal government? And obviously, I think expanding the courts would have to be a part of that because I'm sure a conservative court wouldn't like it, but can the Fed sort of take over some of this machinery so we don't have this ridiculous situation where you have a court in Texas saying that you can limit ballot box drop-off boxes to 1 per county, and then you have another court in Pennsylvania saying no, you gotta be more equitable. I mean, you have this mishmash of rulings and state rules, and it's confusing. It's undemocratic. I mean, everything about it boggles the mind. I don't think there's anything else like it in any Western democracy. So can Democrats have some kind of a democracy agenda where voting rights would be a big piece of this process next year?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's incredibly important. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act would be a massive step in that direction. And
what would that include?
That would include maybe it'll be even bigger than it is now. Like there are safeguards against partisan gerrymandering and racist gerrymandering, and it standardizes a lot of voter registration and voter tabulation bits. But again, as y'all discussed in your last segment, what's the use of passing it if it's just struck down by GOP-controlled courts in a few years? So there is that to consider too. But passing it would be a huge first step.
Yeah, I mean, there really is this need for sort of this, let's just call it the democracy agenda, right? Because our entire democracy is at stake, and Republicans have shown that they have no interest in democratic norms and institutions. So we have to create those safeguards because they are using institutional advantages to maintain minority rule. And I don't see how a democracy survives that kind of effort.
Carolyn, let me ask a more short-term question just on the presidential race upcoming. And we've got on the one hand this sort of faux electoral like stealing process that you're talking about, basically, from the Republicans. And then on the other hand, you have what Markos was mentioning, which is these court cases where they're trying to suppress how many, drop boxes there are in many courts. I was just looking at a Wall Street Journal article and that a couple days ago, and you've got these rulings in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Texas about these drop box locations going all different ways. They've been stayed, they're still in process. I mean, you can't say anything definitive yet about that. Do you think that some of these governors and perhaps grassroots organizations, do you get any sense of how much they're preparing for an eventuality like this, right? Because one thing I keep thinking is that we always have agency. We can always get out in the streets. We can always, do the grassroots work of letting people know that this particular stealing, vote stealing situation isn't gonna fly, not in a democracy, right? So I just wonder, in the short term, if you're getting a sense that any of these governors from the top down and any of these grassroots organizations, democratic, progressive grassroots organizations from the bottom up, are thinking about what it might look like to have to try and stand in the way of a total, effort to steal the vote of one important state like Pennsylvania.
Sure. No, this is absolutely on folks' minds. There was a great piece in the Atlantic a couple of weeks ago that really shone a very bright light on this and got a lot of people very motivated. But also, first things got to come first. A lot of these organizations are correctly focused on actually winning the election so we can take to the streets and defend that win, and defend the rule of law and actual democracy. And a lot of that effort is also spent on keeping voters educated about exactly how they can correctly cast their ballot. Because it might have changed in the time since this show started, for all we know. Court decisions are coming down willy-nilly every day. So it's a lot of balls to keep in the air, for sure. And Democrats do have to be prepared to keep going after November 3rd, basically. This thing very likely won't be done unless it's a huge blowout, in which case, I do think Republicans will still try and sow discord and create confusion. But
Trump is doing that no matter what.
Right. Yeah. There's one guarantee of the Trump era is that all bets are off. Anything is possible.
Is that the only way we can fight this? Is literally to win by 10 and to maximize, just get more votes out, right? Is there anything else beyond that?
In the short term, frankly, that's really about it. But raising folks' awareness of the possibility of this happening, because it is just illegal. It is just unconstitutional. These legislatures will not have an actual leg to stand on. But that won't stop them from trying and creating confusion.
Have any other state legislatures, Republicans, talked about this outside of Pennsylvania's really been the hotbed of this?
Yeah.
And again, as I said in the, introducing the segment, is that Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin are the three states that are going to decide this thing. Republicans are looking terrible in all three of those states. So you lose Pennsylvania, it's 20 electoral votes, and suddenly Arizona doesn't make that up. You need multiple states. Iowa, and Arizona don't make that up. You need a North Carolina, you need a Florida, Georgia. You start getting into states that are actually legit neck and neck states. Obviously, we gotta fight across the board. There's also Senate races. Obviously, we want to fight everywhere. But have there been any other legislatures, or Republican states that looking at ways to, if they lose, that they're going to find ways to try to subvert the vote and cheat to win?
I think the two other states that we need to keep our eyes on for this are absolutely Wisconsin, because Republicans have a long history of doing whatever they want there.
Yeah.
And also, when they were asked by local reporters about this Atlantic piece that was all hey, the state legislators could steal it, their sort of their disavowals of it were less than convincing. Let's just say they were way more evasive than they should have been if they really weren't considering this. And Florida, the legislature in 2000 was just about to see all the voters if Bush v. Gore hadn't gone their way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, Did not know that. Anybody that depends on Florida, any Democrat that depends on Florida, it's almost destined for heartbreak. And there was a poll that showed Biden winning by 10 or 12 points in Florida. And aside from the fact that, no, he's not.
Right.
Even if he was, even if he was, I just don't trust Florida for those reasons precisely. And you think it would be the same mechanism, or are they talking other things, other ways to try and cheat?
I mean, it probably would have been unconstitutional if they'd done it in 2000. But again, we had still had Bush v. Gore. Who knows what's constitutional anymore?
No, I mean, any decision where they say don't ever use this for president is actually inherently a bad BS decision for sure. And so the big one though then is this elector stuff is floating out there. But I think the big one is trying to sue and stopping the count of absentee and vote by mail ballots after election day, because somehow a vote doesn't count.
Right.
Which is
because of the
just,
deadline.
which is
Because
just
that lays the groundwork
crazy.
for shenanigans.
Yeah, it's just crazy in Pennsylvania because they can't even they legally can't even start counting those votes until after election day. So it's
the polls close. It's
right.
It's very strange.
Yeah. And to be clear, again, this is where it speaks to a national standard. In Arizona, they're already counting the votes.
Mm-hmm.
So there are states where you can count early, Arizona being a big one. And that's a Republican top to bottom, right? And they somehow could pass a common sense, pro-democracy piece of legislation. And now there are laws that say anybody that reveals the vote count, it's a felony. And of course, you want that. You don't want these vote counts released. No, there's no argument for that. But you create those safeguards and you make it easier to do, to run a smooth democracy machinery. And so when you see these Republicans in states like Texas and Pennsylvania undermining that, it's not because they love democracy, it's because they know they're losing. This is a sign of weakness. They know they're losing and they're doing everything they can to subvert that democratic process.
I think it's worth at this juncture just reminding people, especially if you live in a swing state, in a battleground state, that number one, the sooner you get your mail, if you're doing mail-in, right? The sooner you get that mail-in ballot in, the better. Right now. Don't wait. But Pennsylvania is kind of a special case in them not being able to start counting until after the polls close. Not most states aren't like that. So the sooner you get it in, the better. The less strain there is on election day. The sooner the calls can be made on who won the state, et cetera. So that's one thing.
But wait, not just that, Kerry, because there's a campaign argument for voting early, and there are lists of who has voted, and so if you, okay, sorry. That's where
I was going. No, you're right.
Okay.
No, go, yeah.
You finished. Now I feel terrible.
No.
I'm going to mansplain this correctly.
I'll take it out on you later. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're right. Early voting. These are the options, right? The mail-in voting, the early voting, and then also, and and then voting on election day, right? But if you feel comfortable doing early voting and going and doing that before election day, if you feel like, health-wise and whatever, given all the considerations, if you feel comfortable doing that, especially if you're in a battleground state, more power to you. Like, get out there and get that vote in ASAP. It is really important, I think, that we do everything we can to have these votes counted as soon as possible. Heading
and it
into
takes a strain off GOTV operations because they don't need to harass you. And if you're watching the show, you're reading Daily Codes, you are going to vote. I'm not really worried about you. Those GOTV volunteers should be focused on people who are forgetting or are procrastinating or maybe can't get a ride to the polls. So let them focus.
I mean,
what?
Yeah.
There's a lot going on right now that's not election related.
You may, exactly. You may die in the next 3 weeks. Get that vote in.
Who said that?
That's a turn.
Goodness.
Was I supposed to say exit the electorate? Either way, there's a lot that can happen. You can break your legs. I broke my legs in January. I wasn't very mobile. There's lots of things that can happen. And so the earlier you get the vote in, you lock that in, and this is the single best thing you can do for democracy right now is to do everything you can to get rid of the orange man in the White House. Dear God, please. So, Carolyn.
And also elect more Democrats to state legislature so we can defend Roe v. Wade on the state level if we lose it at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and that's that last piece is we're in this predicament because in 2010 liberals stayed home, and they were upset at Obama for this or for that, and what does it matter? Well, Donald Trump just showed us what does that matter. And if you think it can't get worse than Donald Trump, Republicans will find a way. I promise you, they will find somebody worse than Donald Trump, because I couldn't fathom George Bush not being the bottom of the barrel, and now George Bush is like rehabilitated. Like, I'm offended at the notion that Bush is okay, not that bad, and it's all by a matter of degrees. So,
admit it, you've been considering buying one of his paintings, Markos. You've been considering.
That's the naked self-portraits in the shower. No. No. So
I wasn't really thinking of that one, but
what else did you think about?
Well, doesn't he have like cat paintings and stuff?
I don't know. I in the shower seared into my skull. I can't.
Anyway.
Carolyn, thank you so much for your time. And just shows you that we really need to do everything we can to maximize the margin of victory. It sucks that we have to work harder to win than they do. It really is not fair, and it's something that needs to be addressed when and if Democrats take power next year. But until then, we have to do everything we can to squeeze out every single vote. So when people say, oh, don't look at the polls because people will get complacent, I don't think anybody's getting complacent, because it's not even about winning anymore. It's about the margin. It's about sending a clear national message that we have to win big. Kerry, any last thoughts?
Not really. I totally agree with that. I don't see any complacency out there. And, I'm a big believer in you have to give people hope, so I don't want to go around saying, I don't know, it's too close. It's too close. No, it's not close. We have the edge here, and we just got to bring it on home. Let's bring it home.
Yeah. So after you vote, if you can vote early, number one thing you can do. The next thing you can do is go to dailykos.com/GOTV. Get out the vote. And we have multiple ways for you to be involved. If you can write postcards, actually incredibly effective. You want to make phone calls. I can never make phone calls. I can write postcards though. Fine, you can knock on doors. There's multiple ways for you to get involved, and we listed several of them out for you. So dailykos.com/GOTV. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Such a pleasure to have all of you. Make sure you subscribe to Daily Kos on Facebook, and join us next week when we're only going to be 2 weeks away from Election Day. Freaking terrifying. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.